The display showed 14 spectrums of light. Kytha's feather crest lay flat against her skull, 3 white feathers pressed so tight they'd lost their iridescence. Her talons had locked, extended, fused into place by a stress reflex she hadn't triggered since adolescence. On every frequency she could perceive, the human ship schematic pulsed with the same answer: no weakness, anywhere. 6 months ago, the hardest problem Kytha had faced was justifying her consulting fee to a dynasty budget committee that didn't believe a civilian contractor needed 3 separate spectrographic arrays. She'd been right about the arrays. The committee had relented, and now she sat in a circular analysis chamber 12,000 meters above sea level. Air so thin and cold it kept her plumage rigid, surrounded by holographic projectors that smelled of ionized atmosphere. Wishing she'd been wrong, wishing they'd cut her funding, wishing she'd never seen what 14 spectrums of light could show when pointed at human engineering. The signal had arrived first, a repeating sequence of prime numbers broadcast from somewhere along the human border, clean and mathematically elegant. The kind of transmission that made analysts lean forward. Kytha had leaned forward. Her 3 white feathers, the rare genetic markers that granted her 2 additional spectrums of perception beyond any living El-Khori, had fanned slightly. Interest, curiosity. The sequence was textbook. Too textbook. Every 100th prime was wrong, not corrupted, not degraded by distance or interference. Deliberately, precisely, intentionally wrong. Someone had seeded errors into a perfect sequence with surgical care. Kytha had circled each deviation, mapped them, cross-referenced the intervals. A test. They were testing whether anyone would notice. She'd flagged the signal and moved to her primary assignment. The wreckage had been recovered 4 months prior. A human vessel, partially intact, hauled into Dynasty space for study. Fleet intelligence wanted a full spectrographic analysis, and Kytha was the only civilian contractor with clearance and capability. Her Pyrolith colleague, Sorath, assisted with thermal imaging. His crystalline skeleton housed flame that typically burned amber gold. Confident, steady, she began her assessment aloud as protocol required for the recording. Standard practice in an analysis chamber built for acoustic precision, where every surface was calibrated to eliminate distortion. Her voice came back to her half a second late, slightly wrong. The vowels stretched. The consonants arrived softer than she'd spoken them. Kytha stopped mid-sentence. Analysis chambers did not echo. The acoustic engineering was absolute. She glanced at Sorath. His flames flickered but held color. He hadn't noticed. Something in the room had changed. She resumed. Hull composition first. The phase change materials woven throughout the whole structure were unlike anything in the Dynasty's material science database. Substances that existed in multiple states, solid, liquid, intermediate, and shifted between them in response to energy input. Every impact, every weapon strike, every burst of thermal or kinetic force triggered a state transition. Each transition absorbed enormous quantities of energy. The hull didn't resist damage. It consumed damage. It fed on it, grew denser, more resilient, more organized with every hit, which meant the readings were wrong. Not the readings, her assumptions. She pulled the schematic wider, scanning every centimeter across all 14 spectrums. Shield generators. Every species mounted them externally, internally, or in hybrid configurations. She searched the bow. Nothing. Midship. Nothing. Engineering section, weapons bays, command deck. Nothing. Sorath's flames dimmed. Amber to pale gold, gold to white, white to blue, blue to something barely visible. Kytha had studied Pyrolith physiology. What she was watching was the species equivalent of a human going white in the face. She'd shown data to a being made of living fire, and his fire had gone cold. No shields, she said. Perhaps concealed, Sorath offered. His voice was thin. His flame said otherwise. I see in 14 spectrums. Kytha's talons scraped the console. There is nothing concealed. Every human ship ever recovered by any species in any conflict across 50 years of contact had 0 shield generators. Fleet Command had assumed they were hidden behind unknown technology. They hadn't been hidden. They simply did not exist. Humans had never built them. The hull was the shield, and every weapon fired at it made it stronger. If you've been wondering what could make a being of living fire go cold, stay with us. Tomorrow's story might answer a different question entirely. She pulled up the battle simulations and watched the data cascade. The simulations ran for 9 minutes. Kytha watched across every spectrum available to her. All 14, the standard 12 plus the 2 that only her white feathers could access. She tracked energy dispersal patterns, molecular realignment speeds, thermal bloom signatures. She looked for the gap, the threshold, the point where the phase change material would saturate, fail to transition, crack under sustained bombardment. 9 minutes, 47 simulated engagements. Every conventional weapon system in the Dynasty arsenal, plus 6 theoretical configurations that existed only in research proposals. The hull held. Every time, in simulation after simulation, the material cycled through its phase states like breathing, absorbing kinetic rounds, energy pulses, plasma bursts, and emerging reconfigured. Denser, faster, more efficient. By the 32nd engagement, the hull was responding to weapons fire before impact, the molecular structure anticipating the energy type based on approach vector and shifting preemptively. It was learning. Kytha's vision narrowed. She felt it happen, the spectrums collapsing one by one like doors closing down a long corridor. Her crest had been flat since the first simulation. Her talons had locked somewhere around the 12th. But now the 3 white feathers, the ones that saw beyond, trembled and went still. The additional spectrums vanished. 14 became 12. 12 became the standard visible band. The stress response had taken her enhanced perception entirely, and for the first time in her adult life, Kytha saw the universe the way everyone else did. Barely at all. She turned back to the prime number signal, the deliberate errors she'd flagged hours earlier. She'd been so certain. A test, she'd called it. A puzzle left to see if anyone was paying attention. But the hull data had changed something in her thinking, cracked a frame she hadn't known she was looking through. Humans didn't build shields because they didn't need them. They didn't broadcast clean signals because clean wasn't the point. Below the 47th error, nested inside the deviation pattern itself, her decryption software found text. Not mathematics, language, encoded in the spacing between wrong numbers, assembled from the rhythm of intentional failure. Earth doesn't bluff. Earth waits until bluffing is unnecessary. Not a broadcast, not a warning transmitted to the El-Khori listening posts. A message buried where only someone who studied the errors would find it. A note left for whoever was smart enough to look in the place everyone else would ignore. How long had it been there, waiting? And now, staring at the analysis display with vision reduced to a single spectrum, Kytha understood what she'd missed. The prime numbers were pristine, beautiful, correct. Every analyst in the Dynasty had studied the sequence, admired its elegance, published papers on its mathematical properties. For months, the primes had been the signal. They weren't. The primes were noise, decoration, a bright, shining distraction calibrated to attract the attention of species who valued precision and correctness above all else. The errors, the ones every other analyst had flagged as anomalies and filtered out, those were the actual transmission. The humans had encoded their real message inside the mistakes because they understood something fundamental about their audience. Analysts study what is right. They discard what is wrong. Soreth's flames had steadied to a low, barely visible ember. He stood motionless beside her, his crystalline skeleton refracting almost no light. Neither of them spoke. The analysis chamber hummed with the sound of projectors holding schematics that no longer needed explanation. Kytha looked at the signal one last time. The 47th error pulsed on her display, patient, waiting, the same way it had waited for months before she'd thought to read it. Her talons remained locked, her crest remained flat. The 3 white feathers that had once shown her more than any living El-Khori could perceive sat pressed against her skull. Seeing nothing beyond what was ordinary, She did not file a report. She did not flag a conclusion. She sat in the thin, cold air and stared at a message hidden inside imperfection. And she could not decide whether she had just witnessed the most brilliant act of communication in galactic history or the opening move of something she was not equipped to name. The 47th error blinked once more, steady, unhurried, like a pulse. So here's the question. If someone hid a message where only the smartest would look, what did they hide where nobody looks at all?